Hello.
Hello, we're live.
Hi, Internet, we're live. Thank you everyone for joining us. We are 21 Toys, and this is our second webinar. We're very excited. For those of you joining us for the first time, we, as 21 Toys, we design and manufacture toys that teach empathy, failure, and creative communication in homes, classrooms, and most recently in offices. We are very, very excited today to introduce Matt Todd to you. I am Alana, the founder of 21 Toys and designer of the Empathy Toy.
And I'm Ryan. I'm the education lead here, as our nice new banner clearly states. Yeah, just because we make wooden toys doesn't mean we don't have some tech savvy, right? And I'm really excited to be the education lead because I get to meet people like our guest today, Matt Todd, and learn about all the interesting things that he's doing.
All right, so, hi Matt.
What's up, guys? How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good.
So I'll just say a bit about Matt Todd. So Matt is an international speaker and leadership facilitator, published writer, a passionate activist for the issues affecting young people, and the guy you definitely want on your team in the event of a zombie apocalypse. Going back to us, he is the former executive director of youth programs for the Institute for Health and Human Potential, and the current director of training and development for North America's largest youth-run charity and educational partner, Free the Children, and the innovative social enterprise Me to We. In his spare time, Matt loves growing mustaches, reading about zombies, and watching people awkwardly run across the street.
So obviously a great guest to be able to have on here, a mustache aficionado and someone who can protect us from zombies. So thank you for joining us. Maybe to start off, could you just tell us a little bit more about what your role is at Free the Children, and maybe a little bit about how empathy intersects with that role?
Yeah, totally. So as you kind of mentioned, I'm the Associate Director of Training and Development at Free the Children and Me to We. So I've been in this role for about 3 years now, but I actually started working with Free the Children and Me to We back in 2006 as a leadership facilitator and a speaker. And so I left Free the Children in around 2008, and I spent 4 years as the executive director of youth programs at the Institute for Health and Human Potential. And what I did there largely was I designed and delivered emotional intelligence and social emotional learning programs for students, educators, and youth service providers. So I actually got a lot of knowledge, I guess, around what empathy is and the role that it plays in our lives, both academically, but personally and professionally as well. And I was able to take that and what I'd learned and actually bring it with me into the work that I do at Free the Children and Me to We. So one of the first projects that I was given when I got here was to create an onboarding program. So our onboarding program is a week-and-a-half-long program where new staff come into the organization, and they spend that first week and a half with myself and other members of the team. And really what we're focusing on is giving them the knowledge, the skills, the tools that they need to get up to speed and to be able to do their job and their roles effectively, right? And part of that was professional development and knowledge, but a part of that was also personal development. And so as I was going through the design process, I was asking myself, okay, how do we want our staff to enter into their roles? What do they need to have, or what do we want them to have with them? And one of those things, one of the pieces that came out of that was to provide them with an introduction to emotional intelligence and the role that it plays in our work and in our lives, but also do it in a fun and engaging way, and to be able to talk about other important concepts like communication and collaboration and even failure, and how important that is into the work that we do. So I was able to take all of that. And so empathy plays a huge role in the work that we do with youth, right? So, we're an organization that literally is trying to change the world. And we're working with young people to go out there and to find issues that they care about and to take action on those issues and to be empathetic towards those, those issues and to care about them. And so we had to actually look at, how do we do that within the organization as well? And so that's why, when I met Alana a few years ago and she told me about this toy that she had developed, I was immediately like, yes, I want this. I want to play with it. I want one for myself just for fun. But I was looking for ways to bring this in, and onboarding was one of the entry points for us in what we do.
Amazing. So how have you used or taught empathy before, and how are you teaching it now?
Yeah, so I'm not actually sure if we were really formally teaching empathy before. And I mean, I don't know if many organizations that do, I'm not sure if it's something right now that is formally brought into any kind of organizational training program. So it wasn't something I don't think that we formally discussed, even though we knew it was important. It's really relevant to the work that we do because, again, like I said, it's at the core of what we do. Our ability to connect with each other in meaningful and purposeful ways is really crucial to the work that we do. We're an organization that is built on relationships. And so one of the concepts that we often focus on, we spend a lot of time talking about, is social capital, or another term for it is positive emotional connection, right? And really what that is about the quality of the relationships and the connections that we have with the people that we work with and with each other. So we were actually able, to be able to bring this in and use it in a way where we can start to actually have conversations around seeing each other as human beings and not just as workers, who are trying to just accomplish a task. So this has been really, really helpful.
Cool. I'm really interested to hear a little bit about some specific cases of you using the empathy toy and some of the interesting metaphors that came out of the different ways that you've used it and also modified it. Yeah.
So one of the most obvious that we've kind of touched on is in our onboarding program, to introduce fun and playful ways to talk about really important concepts that are crucial to the success of our organization. So we're talking about things like teamwork, communication, managing relationships, how to give and receive feedback. So, when we come into onboarding, when staff come into onboarding, we start to play with the empathy toy. One of the important concepts that comes up is language. So, we start to, after we've gone through the play, when we debrief this, we talk about, what did you notice about the language that we were using? And sometimes what comes up is people start to say, well, I noticed that we had different language for the same thing, the same piece of the toy. And that's actually a really relevant and important thing to talk about, right? Is when you come into an organization, what is the language that's being used? And sometimes, it's equally as important to talk about, do we understand when we say something? Do we understand it in the same way? So an example might be, when we talk about performance development, when we're talking about and I don't know if it's a buzzword or it's just, a word, but when we talk about performance development, what are we really talking about? And so bringing that up in conversation becomes really, really important. So that was one way that we've been able to use it as a tool and to be able to talk about it.
I think we've got a photo, actually.
We do. More technology.
Yeah.
All right.
We've got that up there.
Yeah. Cool. So what we're doing here, this is a lot of fun. So we were working with a team and we were talking about, this is actually getting ready for one of our busiest times of the year. So, we have various, depending on the team that you're on, we have busy times throughout the year. And so what we're able to do here is we're able to kind of get people starting to talk about and to prepare to go into a busy season. And so the blindfolds kind of represent not knowing, okay? And so what I mean by that is if this maybe it's your first couple of months within the organization, or you've never gone through one of these busy seasons before, you don't necessarily know what you're about to go through. Right? And then that's okay, right? Because you have to go through it in order to understand it. And so what you see here is you've got two people on the left who they're the communicators. Okay, so they're the ones that actually have to communicate what it is that we're going to achieve. What's our goal? What's the end result? And then the two people on the right are the receivers. They're the people that actually have to take the instruction or at least build. They might be the frontline staff that we have who are out on the road, doing workshops or on We Day or whatever it is. And so what came from this, and which was really interesting, is, everybody has a role, but sometimes they're not necessarily totally clear on what that role is. So this allowed us to actually bring that into a conversation. So we gave you the role of communicator or receiver, but there's 4 of you. So how do you make sure that everybody's involved in accomplishing this goal? So that's, again, another powerful debrief question. The other thing that's really interesting that comes from this activity was even if you're given the role of communicator or receiver, doesn't mean you have to just stick to that role, right? So if you're a receiver, you still have to communicate. You still have to ask good questions. If you're the communicator, maybe you're a manager or a director, you still have to ask good questions. you still have to make sure that the other person is understanding what you're saying. And so this brought up this concept of coaching versus telling, right? So as a director or a manager of people, you know, how much of your time are you spending doing just telling people what they need to do versus coaching people into accomplishing these goals?
No, I love that. It's a very powerful metaphor. And I know another big thing that you do is obviously you've got a lot of people that you onboard and you work with. And right now you just have the one toy. So you came up with a really clever way of incorporating a larger group of people.
Which we also have a photograph.
Which we also have a photograph of.
1 second.
Let's get that up there and talk about what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, so what's happening in this particular game scenario?
Yeah, so this was really interesting because this kind of just happened organically. I had the challenge of how do you use one toy with a really large group? You know, so if you have 4 people, that's cool. You know, you can do that the way that we just talked about. But you know, in onboarding, we might have 8 people or we might have 30 in a room, depending on the time of the year for us. And so I had to get really creative on, well, how do I use this toy in a way that's still meaningful, still brings up important concepts. So I actually started thinking about, you know, stuff that we had done in the past around modules with youth, and kind of got inspired by a module that we had created years and years and years ago, and used a toy to do this. So what you're seeing here is, you know, in this example, you know, you can see 5 people, but often we would have more. You might have a couple of people around just observing and taking notes. But everybody has a role. So the 2 people, Amanda and Odessa there, who are blindfolded, they have your traditional role of communicator and receiver, right? So Odessa's the communicator. She's helping to guide Amanda into, you know, building that toy, building that model. But then you have Mira and Ashley who are facing the wall, and we gave them the role of communicator. But what they were doing is they're talking to Odessa and to Amanda. So Amanda and Odessa, what they were told is that they can only ask questions. That was the only thing that they were able to do. We intentionally put limits on them. So Odessa and Amanda were only allowed to ask questions to Mira or Ashley. And then Mira and Ashley weren't able to actually see what was going on. So this got really interesting, right? Because they had to get really good at asking questions to understand what is going on with Amanda and with Odessa. And then you see O'Neill, who's standing against the wall, and he's facing Ashley. And what he's doing is he's communicating. He can see the end result, but he can't communicate it by talking. So he had to find another way or use another way to communicate. And so we started doing this, and the first time I did this, I'm like, I have no idea what's going to come out of this. And so one of the really powerful debriefing questions that I often start off with is, okay, how did you like this activity? And everybody's like, oh, it's so fun, you know, it's great. And then I was like, okay, what do you think this is about, right? Because I don't even think I knew at that point. And so I was like, what do you think this is about? And it got brought up, well, maybe this is about organizational communication. I was like, oh, that's really interesting. What do you mean? And they were like, well, maybe, you know, Amanda and Odessa, they represent the frontline workers. You know, they're our frontline staff. They're the people who are out on the road and actually, you know, they're the ones that are making these things happen day to day. And Mira and Ashley represent our managers or our, you know, directors who are given the vision, or given the outcome, and have to communicate that to Amanda and Odessa, to their frontline workers, to their staff, but you know, they have some limits put on them. They may not necessarily see what Amanda or Odessa are doing every single day. So that's why, you know, asking questions becomes really, really important, clarifying all those things. And then O'Neill, you know, maybe he represents our leaders in the organization. You know, they're the ones with the vision. And they have to communicate that vision. It's not always face-to-face. It's not, you know, through talking. Maybe it has to come through email. And so how do you interpret that information that you're getting and then communicate that down the line to the people who are then out there executing it? So it was a really cool way to introduce the concept of organizational communication, to actually allow people to start to empathize and understand, well, how frustrating or difficult might this be for a frontline worker if I don't ask good questions, or if I don't, you know, give this information in bite-sized pieces, as opposed to trying to get it all done all at the same time. You know, and as a leader, you know, how important it is to make sure that you're being very clear, the best you can be, on what it is that we're trying to achieve. You know, so alignment was one of those things that came from that conversation as well.
Right, incredible.
Yeah, that's great. So one thing before, we're just gonna have a few more questions, then we're gonna go to Q&A. So if anyone who's watching does have any questions, you can click on Q&A, and then you can submit your question. And I think that is technically the right way to do it. But we'll let you know if there's more to it than that. So Matt, after you did workshops like this, where you made things a bit more, I guess you'd say more formal, or you'd say like, look, we're actually going to specifically talk about empathy and its role in our organization. What kind of changes did you observe? Sorry, we're also live, so we're right next to a speaker series where they're training, I think, on public presentation skills. So every now and then you'll hear applause. So just assume those are part of our sound effects. So Matt, in terms of changes that you've seen, what have you witnessed as a result of bringing it to the forefront?
It's been really cool. I mean, not just in onboarding, but in other teams within our organization. So, you know, for onboarding, you know, one of the changes we start to see is people start to use a common language. And not just that they're using a common language, but they're understanding what we mean when we say certain things. So it's about, and if they don't, you know, the importance of asking clarifying questions, and just how powerful asking those questions can be. Onboarding, obviously, you know, it's helping us bring people up to speed faster by giving them an experience, and in being able to give them kind of a taste of what it might be like coming into an organization, you know, that like ours. And then team building. So I've actually had other teams take the toy and use them at retreats, for example. So we have our leadership team, and when I say our leadership team, this is our team on Me to We that actually is out there on the front lines working with youth, right? Teaching them social justice and all these really, really valuable skills. And so what they did was they actually used it at the team retreat. And so they had their senior leaders, their management come together, and they started to use this toy in the under the concept, or within the concept of communication and feedback, right? And so they started to have some really valuable conversations around not just about how to give feedback, but what it feels like to be given feedback. You know, so helping you as a manager understand what's important when you're giving your staff feedback. What do they need to feel and to understand? Another really cool thing that came from that was, you know, they started to understand, well, what is it like to do something or to work through something when you don't know how to do it? So maybe you've never experienced it. So, you know, some of our managers are brand new. They've never done this before. What does that feel like, right? And so one of the things that the big result of all of this was that it worked. We were able to take this toy and use it in a way where it worked in conjunction with already existing processes. So feedback, for example, or it reinforced our already existing culture, right? So really, really powerful stuff. Another team that was able to use this in a totally different context was our coordination team. And our coordination team is really focused on customer service, right? So they're the ones that when you go on a youth trip, when you sign up to go on a youth trip, they're the ones that parents and youth are connecting with up until that point where they go on the trip, right? And so they had to find a way, a fun, playful way to start to talk about how do you deliver large quantities of information, large quantities of detailed information in a way that is understandable, and in a way that is not only just giving the information, but addressing any concerns that a parent might have of sending their kid, you know, maybe for the first time overseas, right? So again, what was talked about was communication in a playful way where they could be a little less rational. So it's not about being like, okay, this is how you communicate. These are the steps that you take, but actually focusing on doing it in a playful way where they actually discover what happens, you know, and they can actually go through and debrief that and talk about that. The other big thing that came from this, which I loved, which I think was like so right on, and it's spot on for, you know, connecting empathy to the world of youth travel. because in the world of youth travel, again, you're connecting with parents, you're connecting with youth who maybe are a little bit anxious about going on this trip for the first time, was they talked about framing their communication style to the person receiving the information, as opposed to framing your communication style to what you're most comfortable with. So it was really about understanding it from another person's perspective, which I thought was just like amazing to see.
That's amazing. That's cool. I only have one final question, and then we'll open it up to other people on the interwebs that might have questions as well. And I just want to think sort of bigger picture and ask, what do you think the implications are of using a tool like this in the type of work that you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, it's fun, right? It's playful, it's non-threatening. So it's a really good, engaging way to start to bring up important concepts for organizational growth and development. We're playing and taking that experience, and then we're debriefing it in a way that is immediately applicable, right? And that people can refer back to. For example, we're able to take an experience using the empathy toy and relate it to something like why providing clear, bite-sized pieces of feedback and asking clarifying questions is so important as a manager or a director. Or being able to help our teams to understand what it might feel like for a staff member who's brand new to the organization coming in and they don't understand this language that's being used. What is it that they should do in a situation like that? So we're actually helping them understand that faster.
Perfectly encapsulates and sums up the amazing things that you're doing with it. So yes, this is now the free flow portion of our programming now. So if there's any people that have questions, again, you can ask it on the side of your screen. If not, we'll I'm gonna do some pre-K ones.
Yeah. So Matt, I was just gonna say why, because it's not just with the work that we're doing, but a lot of people are talking about empathy in the workplace now. Do you know why that is, or why this is suddenly becoming of interest? I mean, even the founder of LinkedIn is I think it was just last year wrote an article that said that empathy is the #1 job skill, and I think it's 2020. So yeah, just wondering why suddenly it's becoming more relevant now.
Yeah, I mean, empathy is part of emotional intelligence, right? And we're seeing more and more research and more literature out there that's talking about the importance of emotional intelligence in success, and that actually it's proposed that, it's proposed that emotional intelligence is a better predictor of success than IQ and technical skills combined, right? And part of empathy, or part of emotional intelligence rather, is self-awareness. So it's about understanding yourself, understanding what drives your behavior, what motivates you. And then it's also about understanding, well, how do I, once I'm aware of that, how do I manage that? How do you manage these emotions that you bring with you into the workplace? Because those emotions that you bring with you into the workplace influence and impact your ability to connect with the people around you. And empathy plays such a huge part in that, right? It's the difference between, accomplishing your goals and hitting your numbers, for example, and failing miserably because, you weren't able to connect with that person, or, your intention and your impact were mistaken, right? So we hopefully we come every day with good intention, of making ourselves better, of making the people around us better. But when our emotions come into play, it can have the opposite impact that we actually set out to have. And so empathy, being a big piece of that, it becomes so important. It's about, how do I put myself in your shoes? How do I understand where you're coming from? I talk about often, like, it's having a disagreement with a coworker and stepping back from that and saying, well, wait a minute, before I make a judgment or before I assume something, let me try to figure out, well, where they're coming from. Maybe they had a bad morning, let me look at, well, maybe they had a rough morning with their kids, or, maybe they weren't able to get a lot of sleep because they're working on this project. So it's really just about connecting with each other. And again, it's that human piece of what we do.
I just have one more question. I know I've been thinking about this for a little bit. Like, we agree that empathy is super important. How do we know when it's actually being exercised to a greater extent? Like, and I guess this is a two-part question. Like, how do you know when you are sort of gaining empathic knowledge? And how do you see other people that you think are becoming more empathic through their work with Me Too?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think for myself, you know, it's about self-awareness, right? It's about being able to step back on a regular basis and, you know, look at what you're learning, look at where you're failing, look at the relationships around you. I mean, something that I try, and I'm not always great at this, you know, but part of how I want to be able to measure my success is around the quality of the relationships that I have in my life. You know, and if I look at the quality of the relationships, work, for example, my work relationships, and I have a feeling that they're not where they need to be, it's a pretty good indicator that there's something I need to change, right? I think we focus so much on trying to change other people that we forget that the person you have to change first is yourself. And it's about looking at that. And I think that when you do that, that actually encourages and inspires other people to be more empathetic and to be more, and to change. So I don't know if I answered your question directly, but
that's
great. Yeah. And we've actually got, we have 2 questions right now. So I'll answer actually Jen's, we'll get to Jen's question first, which is, can you describe something that happened that was unwanted and or unexpected? Any prior troubleshooting tips that you could share?
When it comes to the toy, like
I think yes. It's with the toy, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I without getting like specific and just kind of off the top of my head, I mean, this can be an uncomfortable sometimes experience for people. You know, I've seen people, you know, get a little bit overwhelmed and not feel attacked, but you know, they might feel uncomfortable because they're not able to, in that situation, necessarily manage those emotions the way that they might want to, right? So again, I don't know if it's about things going horribly wrong as much as it's about, you know, being open to whatever happens, right? So every opportunity, I think, is everything that happens, especially using this toy, can provide a really valuable debriefing opportunity, right? So if something like that happens, it's about taking that experience and saying, okay, what happened? Why do you think that happened? If you were to change this, what would you do, right? So again, it's like, it's about, I mean, and I think this is core to facilitation, right? It's being open to the outcome and not getting too stuck on, okay, this needs to happen. And I think that's where you find the most value using this toy.
Great.
Great. And then we have a question from Molly. So she wanted to know if your staff had any initial resistance to using a toy designed or perceived as being designed for kids.
No, because we don't talk about it like that. So you know, when we bring it into onboarding, nobody knows what it is. It's in the box, and everybody's like, "Oh, what is that?" You know, and you're like, "Okay, everybody's gonna put on blindfolds, and you know, and this is what we're gonna do." So we don't actually introduce it as like a toy for kids. I don't even call it like necessarily a toy. You know. And so not really. And then when we introduce it to other teams, you know, it's a tool in a lot of ways, right? So whether we call it a toy or a tool really depends on who we're talking to. But I haven't, to my knowledge, to my experience, I haven't actually had to address that.
Great. Okay. Well, I think that wraps up our second webinar. Matt, thank you so much.
Well, guys, thank you.
A pleasure and an honor.
It's fun.
Well, have a great night, Matt. And thank you, Jen and Molly and everyone else out there listening. So until next time.
Cool. See ya.
Bye, Matt.